Good afternoon. Wow, I didn't realize how powerful my voice was. I'm Mike Doran. I'm a senior fellow here at Hudson, and it's my distinct honor to welcome Dr. Kamal al-Labwani and Reuel Gerecht. Dr. al-Labwani is one of the most courageous individuals that I've ever met. He's a true hero. I say that without the slightest bit of irony. In a moment, I'm going to turn to him and ask him to tell his story. I'll just be very brief here and say that that he's a courageous Syrian dissident. He spent 9 years. Is it 9 years?
13.
13 years?
In prison? 10 years.
10 years. 10 years in prison in Syria in the worst conditions. I first met him in 2005 when I was working in the White House of George W. Bush, and he came in to the White House to talk to senior officials. And he came out of the White House and made a number of statements that did not find favor with the Assad regime. And then they put out a warrant for his arrest, and he still went back to Syria. And I won't say anything more. I'll let him tell us in a moment. But really, Dr. al-Labwani, you are really a hero of mine, and it's a great honor to have you here today. And then next to Dr. al-Labwani, we have Reuel Gerecht, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and one of the leading experts on Iran here. And so today we're going to talk about, in general, the situation with Iran today and its implications for Syria. But before we do that, I want to turn the floor over to Dr. al-Labwani. And if you could just, for those of us who are not familiar with your story, if you could just tell us your story, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you all to invite me here. And I am really indebted for you because you helped me a lot at 2005 and still helped me when I was in prison. Maybe my life became safe because you insist on put pressure on the Bashar Assad to don't kill me. So I am really indebted for you.
I have to know. It's very nice of you to say that. It's very nice of you to say that. But all the credit goes to you, and all the credit to President George W. Bush, who cared who cared deeply about dissidents and cared about your situation. And if it wasn't for that, then we wouldn't have been able to make any statements.
So I still think I have friends here. Still think I have friends in the United States. We need United States to involve in the matter of Middle East, because Middle East is very important in the world. So I still in a prison for 6 years, and the revolution became out, and the pressure more and more from the people of Syria, so they release me. When they release me, I return to start with cooperation with the United States government, but unfortunately, I think that department is not very want to find solution in Syria. It is not matter for them to find solution in Syria. So the relation, start to be not good. But now we have a chance. We have a chance because what happened when I was here, I warned about civil war in Syria, and nobody listened because nobody expected civil war in Syria. Okay, civil war in Syria. And now we face not civil war in Syria, civil war in Middle East. So the problem is not understanding. They don't listen to the people. They don't listen. They listen to themselves. They use the wrong conceptions and deceive themselves. So we cannot find solution. If we still think in this box, we cannot find any solution. We have to change the box. I am here now to open this box of thinking, and to find solution, and easy solution. It don't need a very large or very big intervention, just to understand and use the tools which exist till now. Syrian people is the only one can help in the land of Syria to dismiss Iran, to dismiss the terrorists. But the Syrian people now were, because Bashar Assad makes strategy of parallel, you know. The parallel destroys the society, destroy everything, and dismiss everybody. We have in society, that's what we have now. We have gangs, we have groups, but we don't have society. Everybody say, where is the Syrian people? Where is the opposition? No, they are in refugee. Nobody need us to organize ourselves. Nobody need us to unite ourselves. Till now, I try several times to come to United States. Till now, I have visa. So if you don't invite the people, or don't want them together, we cannot find. I can bring lot of official, lot of leaders to come here or to come to any, and you can help them to reorganize themselves politically and military, and you have friends on the land. I go to Israel and negotiate with the Israeli government, ex-defense minister and the new defense minister. I visit Israel 4 times and start understanding, but Israel alone cannot. We need United States to govern, because the Gulf state must be involved. The most problem thing now which we face is Iran by its coalition with Turkey. It's very, very, very dangerous, because this kind of unity between Shia extremists and Sunni extremists, very, very dangerous. And lot of Sunni now became allies to Iran. So Syria is very critical issue now to speak about, and we will return, I think. So myself come here, just need somebody to listen. I need to correct the wrong conceptions which we used. When we used Bashar Assad became polite, he will dismiss Iran. That's mad conception. Why? Because Bashar Assad cannot do that, and if he do that, he will make Iran allies to the opposition. Iran have the land of al-Assad, and the Islamist opposition have the other land. They will be united against Assad and dismiss Assad and dismiss Russia also. Because we create the danger, we threaten the Israeli security by do nothing, by say we will not intervene. This policy is very, very bad. Policy depend on Geneva, policy depend on Russia, policy depend on do nothing. Do nothing, that means destroy all the area. And the loss of Middle East will change the balance between East and West, between China and United States, and who wins the Middle East, who wins the battle. That is, I am here. I am really thankful.
Okay, thank you. Before I turn it to Ruel, though, I just wanted the audience to get a little sense of your personal story.
Personal.
Your personal story, yes.
Yeah.
You started as a medical doctor, right?
Okay, I am doctor from Zabadani near to Damascus. My family, ancient family, come from Spain to to Middle East. That's 4 centuries before. We are Arab, Sunni, stay in Zabadani, and my studying is a medical doctor. I experienced 20 years. I involved in opposition since 1976.
Since 1976?
That is in my university, and after that I served military service in Hama, which faced massacre. I know what kind of this regime. So
this is when Assad, the father, destroyed
Hama, 1982. And still
you were working there as a medical doctor?
Medical doctor in the...
Trying to save the people who were being massacred.
I cannot do anything because I was in military service. I was in military service, obliged, you have to serve 2 years in military service. I was a doctor there. So that time, was I see what happened now in Syria. What happened in Hama is example. Now happened in all Syria. So I know exactly which kind of this regime, which kind of this, what they are deal with the people. They killed about 40,000 people in 1 month. So I still thinking what we face. We face Muslim Brotherhood, the fanatic, and we face the dictator, and study the religious ideas and the dictatorship. So 20 years I am studying in my clinic in Zabadani and prepare myself till the Damascus Spring. Damascus Spring was
2001.
2000 when Hafiz Assad died and his son come to power. We are republic and they make it kingdom. So we find a chance to move. We go and make forums, and try to the same example of East Europe, because we are Stalin-style regime. So this way we try to create a movement, democratic movement, but the regime put us in solitary for 3 years. For me, from 2001 to 2004 in solitary, and after that released me. When the regime released me, the ambassador of United States, Margaret Scobie, invited me to her home officially and start a relation with her. She was a very, very nice woman and very active, and she invited me officially to Washington 2005 after the assassination of Hariri. And that time they are discussing the matter of Syria, and I am coming from Syria. So I find who listen, I find who understand, I find who want to work, and you were that time. I hope the same spirits find it now, because I think the President Trump, he has dream also about solution in Middle East, and we have. This is the dream, our future. So we need peace and stability in Middle East, and we are ready now to work for this. But we need to find a team who listen, who understand, who negotiate. Well, I am ready to do that by Syrian people, with Arab also peoples, and I am friend to Israel. Publicly, I don't go inside, and I am a friend to, so I can rule this, play this rule if you want.
We'll get back to the politics and all this and the policy in a minute. I just want to ask you one question. When you left the White House in 2005 and you decided to go back to Syria, knowing that you were going to be put in jail, why did you do that?
So if I don't be able to pay my effort, I cannot ask the others help the Syrian. I have to work first and ask my friends. If I don't work, if I don't take the danger, if I don't work, the people of Syria will not be brave to challenge this regime. If I stay back and go to street, no, I have to go first of them. Before them, I have to face the regime, and I face the regime by my body.
Well, you're a braver man than I. I would have, gone to Miami. But really, it's a great honor to have you here. Ruel, could you set the scene for us? What's going on? What's your sense of what's happening in Iran today? What are the big decisions we face?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that up until the eruptions that started in late December, that the Islamic Republic was looking at a fairly peachy situation in the region, that they were more or less the dominant power in the northern Middle East. I think if you look at Syria, that the dreams of the late Revolutionary Guard Corps commander, General Hamadani, who birthed the militia system in Syria, had borne fruit, that the situation in Syria had stabilized sufficiently for the Iranians. I'm not sure the Iranians ever wanted to stabilize that much, but it had proved successful with relatively small contributions from the Guard Corps. People tend to think that the Guard Corps contribution in Syria has been massive. I think in manpower, it really hasn't. They've rotated in forces. I think the demands have at times been a little challenging, but nothing that the Guard Corps couldn't handle. Also, I think there was a desire on the part of younger members of the Guard Corps to sort of prove their mettle the way their fathers had proved theirs in the Iran-Iraq War. So I think the hopes and aspirations that some folks had in the West that the Iranians would bite off more than they could chew and that casualties would mount and they would affect the Guard Corps' performance, I think was mirror imaging and wishful thinking. Now, whether the eruption in Iran has changed those calculations, my best bet is no, they have not. If anything, they will incline the regime to double down abroad, not to retreat. There could be some American actions that would make them rethink that calculation. I think that's unlikely. I have not yet seen any effort on the part of the Trump administration to make me believe that it wants to intercede in a forceful way on the ground in Syria or in Iraq. I think the status quo in Iraq is one that the Pentagon is comfortable with, and they don't really want to go into the fearful situation of U.S. forces having to deal with possible attacks upon them led by the Iranians once again. So I don't see the Americans actually causing that much pressure upon the Iranians in their overseas adventures. I don't think it's within the capacity of the Sunni Arab states to do much either. I think last January, I think there was some hope that you could have some type of an effective Sunni Arab alliance that somehow would bring pressure on the Iranians. I think that's proven to be false. I don't think you have any Sunni Arab state that has any expeditionary capacity that can really hurt the Iranians. They have any desire. If anything, General President Sisi has shown that he's quite capable of sending a token force on Assad's side. So that situation, I don't think, looks very hopeful. And again, I have to suspect that the Iranians will more or less maintain the status quo. If they need more manpower, their first choice will again to be deploy these Shiite militias that they have trained that are literally from all over the map in the greater Middle East. They are increasingly, seasoned soldiers. If they can't handle the situation, then the regime will pull in the Guard Corps. Most of the Guard Corps, by the way, is not trained, and they don't use them for riot control anyway. And I would emphasize inside of Iran, if you look at what happened in 2009, 2010, it's by no means clear that the supreme leader is confident in the performance of the Guard Corps broadly. That there was a game of musical chairs that occurred in 2009, 2010. I think the best bet on why that musical chairs occurred was because the supreme leader did not believe Guard Corps commanders uniformly showed sufficient vigor in their desire to put down the pro-democracy Green movement.
Pardon me, when you say musical chairs, you mean that he had a few units that he had great confidence in and he used those?
Well, the Basij was the primary forces used. All the Basij is commanded by Guard Corps, but there were some deployments of the Guard Corps in the 2009, 2010, and commanders were removed from their positions. And again, it's hard to tell. There are lots of various reports, even some statements from Guard Corps officers themselves that strongly suggest that the elements in the Guard Corps were uncomfortable with crushing the Green movement. However, in the end, they did handle it, and particularly members of the Basij, which is this mobilization force that of young men who use clubs, motorcycles, etc. They proved effective in putting down the 2009 pro-democracy movement. This, I would argue, the demonstrations today are much more troublesome because they occur over a wider geographic area. The demonstrations in 2010, by the way, were not just in Tehran. They occurred outside of Tehran, too. It's just the enormity of the Tehran protests gathered everybody's attentions, because they should have, because they were of a similar size to what happened in 1979. But today you have a very complex situation where you have people from all social strata, small towns, larger provincial towns, that have combined together to explicitly go after the Islamic Republic. And I think it's always good to remember historically that if you use the revolution as a basis, it took almost a year for demonstrations in Iran in 78, 79 to go explicitly revolutionary. In 2009, it took approximately a week for demonstrations that initially started off about a fraudulent presidential election to end up explicitly seeking the overthrow of the Velayat-e Faqih, of the supreme leader Khamenei. The demonstrations that occurred in late December and are still going on, they started out protesting existentially the Islamic Republic. So the regime knows that this is a volcanic situation. I think that's one reason they've been hesitant to hit it as hard as they could have. They have deployed force. At least 20 people have died. Whenever the official figures are released, you know that the real figures are higher. But I think there is some concern. And they also got to remember the Basij, the mobilization force, which they have a flying wing. They've had a flying wing of the Basij ever since massive soccer riots in Tehran in 1989. These units aren't that large. And one thing we saw from 2009, if the regime cannot reliably deploy Basij or Revolutionary Guard units from the same region or towns that they come from, because you cannot reliably deploy young men to beat their relatives. So they have to be able, and this is somewhat logistically challenging, they have to be able to deploy forces from different areas to ensure their loyalty. In the past, the ones I've liked best are where they deploy Azeris to beat on the Persians, and that's actually gives some Azeris some fun. There's a limit to how that can work.
I should point out that Ruel is probably unique among analysts of our generation, and that he's actually spent a lot of time in Iran. He was in the CIA and the Directorate of Operations for, is it 11 years or was it 9? 10 years.
Shouldn't that hold that against me?
And then after, you'll correct me also if I'm wrong, after he left his service, he went and hitchhiked across Iran under an assumed identity. Is that?
I wouldn't say I was hitchhiking. I was in a truck. But
you were, yeah. So I mean, he's almost as fearless as Dr. al-Labwani.
Far from it.
Yeah, but it's not something I would have done. I just have to say. But Ruel actually has a sense of the place that I think a lot of our analysts don't, just because of the whole history of the relationship. So, Dr. Labwani, back to you. Can you? What's your sense of the situation in Syria now and the chance of the opposition? I think common wisdom tells us that the war is almost over and the opposition is lost. And I take it that you have a rather different perspective, and I wonder if you could explain to us why.
Yeah. I think 7 years till now is enough to convince that the people of Syria is destroyed, and the cities of Syria is destroyed. This victory of the regime means destruction of Syria. This is not victory. This is destruction. So what remain in Syria now is people under siege, people under pressure, and gangs and occupation. Especially the land now for two parts. One part of the militia of Iran. The regime is very weak now. The people of Syria is very weak. Also, the other side, small, not so big, fanatic Islamists in Idlib or so. The positive land is the Kurds at the north. So, everybody...
The Kurds, you said.
The Kurds, Qasad, that democratic Syria. This is example is good. So if we can make the same example in South, we can start to create the new future of Syria. Everybody think.
Pardon me, if I can just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. You're saying that there's a potential for creating in the south of Syria the same kind of arrangement that we have with the Syrian Democratic Forces in Raqqa and so on.
Let's cooperate with them.
Is that the idea?
Yeah.
And what is the element that that would pull together the groups in the south into a unity?
Okay, this example because United States help in ordination, help in organization, and military, help them to make their own austerity, own power, and help them to return to their homes and cover them from aeroplanes. So it needs the same example. The same example.
So you would like a United States supported
support the same
safe
example. Safe zone
in the south.
In the south and east.
So
south and east, but south near the border to Israel is different than the east because.
You mean the east out to Deir ez-Zor?
Deir ez-Zor, okay. So two options.
Two safe zones. One in the Deir ez-Zor area and one in the south.
Why? First of all, I have to speak about the border of Israel. Now, at the border of Israel, there is some groups, some of them moderate, some of them fanatic. But the problem that Hezbollah and Iran convinced a lot of Islamic groups to be allies to them. Because the support cut from Jordan, cut from everything, and they're seeking for food, so he will give him, and he tried to negotiate. He will use the opposition, to fight opposition near the border, to kill the agents to Israel. So everything in the south, in the border, will collapse. How we can face this? We can face this by creating safe zone and make good authority and give them support to stay.
The safe zone you imagine would encompass all of Daraa, would it?
Maybe if order.
How far are you?
I think we have to start from the border of Israel, 20 kilometers first step.
20 kilometers.
This is the first step one, and step two to expand it. If Jordan involved, we can make it from the border of Jordan.
Now, the first when you talk to an American audience about this idea, the first response you're going to get is, are you asking for American military intervention, direct U.S. military intervention?
No.
No.
No. Now I go to Israel to 2014. And speak with Mr. Bogi Alon. And I say, it is a good idea.
Who
can do that.
The Minister of Defense?
Minister of Defense. He say, it is a good idea, but I need support from one of major states, United States or Russia. So I need permission. Then I am going to United States. And he became, come here and say no.
So you think that if President, it's your impression, your assessment that if President Trump were to support this idea, he would find a willing partner in the Israelis.
Okay.
That's your vision? Is that
no need to intervention directly, just allowed Israeli and cover it in diplomatic issues. And Israeli ready to do that. And our people can still exist. But after time, I don't know. I cannot say that you have allies on the land. All the land will become to Iran.
So let me get Ruel in here. Ruel.
Yeah, I just say, I mean, I don't think it's a secret to say that, you know, some military officers who were pivotal in Iraq have also suggested that there's something to do in Syria. And I think it's fair to say that the Trump administration has reviewed plans for months now about how you create and expand safe havens in the South and the North too, but I think actually it's more pivotal now in the South. So far, you've seen no appetite for that on the part of the Oval Office. So until you do, I don't think
is it no support in the Oval Office or no support in the Pentagon?
Well, I think the Pentagon certainly has little appetite for this, but if the president really wanted it, then the president can force situations. There wasn't really support in the Pentagon for the surge, but there was certainly a powerful constituency of one in the Oval Office that drove it. So, you know, the plans are out there. They've been thought through on how to develop a more robust safe haven that would eventually put pressure on the regime and the Iranians. But I don't think as I said, I don't think there's any desire of that. And unless the Americans are willing to take the lead, unless they're willing to provide air support, which means they have to be prepared to outbluff the Russians, then I don't think this goes anywhere. And I have to say, I don't think the Israelis are prepared to put much effort into this unless they see a willingness in Washington to contribute forcefully to this endeavor. I think the Israelis are comfortable with the status quo.
I don't know. You know, my impression in talking to the Israelis is that there's a growing apprehension about the Revolutionary Guard, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, moving south from Damascus and ensconcing themselves on the Golan. And so
I think they have a modus vivendi worked out. I mean, it may prove to be inadequate, but I think they have a modus vivendi worked out with the Russians that the Israelis will kill members of the Revolutionary Guard Corps who stray too far south.
The question is, at a certain point, and I'll turn back to you in a second, Dr. Labwani, I think that's the dynamic at the moment, but they don't have an actual agreement. My understanding is they don't have an agreement with the Russians. They have a very nuanced policy where they go to Moscow and they keep Putin informed of their red lines and of their major concerns. And they let him know that they are going to take action in support of those red lines. But they haven't come to an agreement. They just inform him. They don't surprise him, but they don't ask permission. And then they take military action. And that's worked out so far so good, because the Iranians and the Russians are busy in the north and they're busy around Damascus. But if they get a grip on the north and they get a grip on Damascus, then they may well start moving south. And it's not clear that the Russians are dependent on the Iranians in Syria to provide the ground forces, as you mentioned. So if at a certain point the Iranians, the last thing the Iranians want is for the world to think that you can deliver Iran through Moscow. And at a certain point, they're going to want to show some independence from the Russians. So it remains to be seen. I mean, all I'm trying to say is that I think that the situation is sufficiently fluid that you might have a change of heart or a different assessment on the part of the Israelis, particularly if there was a change of thinking about this in the White House. I agree with you we haven't seen any appetite for that. But a change, the events, as we're seeing in Iran, right? Events take place, and then people's perceptions change. But let me turn to you, Dr. Labwani, and get your sense of your understanding of the relations between Assad, the Iranians, and the Russians, and how that dynamic works.
Okay. I hear from Jordanian government and Israeli military say that Bashar Assad, you have to accept Bashar Assad. Bashar Assad good on the one alternative to make stability. And Bashar Assad became polite because he take a lesson. So these ideas, I hear.
I'm sorry, Bashar al-Assad became polite?
Became polite.
Yeah.
So, my respond what? Because I think if you want Bashar Assad to dismiss Iran, Russia and Bashar Assad to dismiss Iran, it's good, okay. If he can, he cannot. If he try, if he's sure to do that, he has to use violent issues against Iran. That's what happened now. Iran don't go out. Iran changed their mind. Because Iran, Russia, and the regime, we are here. When Russia and Assad try to dismiss Iran, Iran will become enemy to them. And then we will find Iran with the same front of us, the Sunni opposition and Iran opposition will be united, not dismissed outside. We will create a new coalition against Israel, against United States, against Russia, and it would be very strong. The same example of Hamas and Hezbollah, Muslim Brotherhood, Iran and Turkey. The same example, we will find it on the land. So it is very dangerous strategy, most dangerous than the others. So the only one who can dismiss Iran, not the Bashar Assad, not the Russia, the Syrian people. We have to start from this point. Syrian people and their rights. We have to announce Bashar Assad is a criminal, have to account, and the occupation of Russia, okay, but the Iranian militias is terrorist militias, must be go out. We will help the Syrian people to build their authority by the international watch, and we will help give them humanitarian issue. I will prevent any aeroplane to come there. We can create safe zone and non-armed zone. Nobody can come to the border with his weapons. It's very important to do non-armed and safe zone near the border of Israel and Jordan, and we need it.
Do you think we talked a little bit about the Israelis. What about the Jordanians? Do you think the Jordanians would support this as well? Because common wisdom also says about the Jordanians that they're not particularly interested in building a safe zone.
If they are alone, they cannot. But if they have support from Saudi Arabia and cover from United States and permission from Israelis, they are very, very interested in this. The King Abdullah personally interested in this, and he speak about far defense about, because Jordania now is threatened by ISIS, threatened by Iranian intervention, threatened by civil war between Palestine and Jordanian. It is very easy to collapse. So they are afraid to do anything, to move without help, to avoid the crash and also.
And in a moment, I'd like to come back to you and talk to you a little bit about your visits to Israel, because I think you're also, one of the things that's striking about you is the efforts that you've made to reach out across the border. That's not something you hear about very often. But let me turn back now just to Ruel. And you gave us, Ruel, a general analysis of what's happening in Iran and in Syria. But I wonder if I just put it to you starkly and said, what are we witnessing in Iran right now? Is this the end of the regime? Is this the beginning of the end of the regime? Is this the end of the beginning of the end of the regime? Where are we in your?
Yeah.
Or is this a flash in the pan?
Well, no, it's definitely not a flash in the pan. I mean, I think you are witnessing the continuing crack up of theocracy inside of the Islamic Republic. I mean, this has been a long process in the sense that once Khomeini died in 1989, you started to see cracks all through the system. You started to see theological challenges to the regime. You saw intellectual challenges to the regime. I mean, it's always good to remember that who carried the torch for the revolution in 1978-79? It was the college educated. The, quote, peasantry, the urban peasants, were considered to be retrograde. Now, it is fairly clear that the denominator for membership or affiliation or sympathy with the pro-democracy movements, Green Movement, is higher education. The regime has lost higher education, and this is after innumerable reforms of the university system in the Islamic Republic. At the same time, they're massively expanding the number of students who go to university. So no matter what they do, they're sort of breeding their own antibodies. This is a problem they can't handle. This is why they now supposedly, see their base in what they call the Mustazafan, the weak, the oppressed. But as demonstrations have revealed recently, that base isn't reliable either. I actually think scholars and lots of journalists have incorrectly assessed the differences of opinion between the Mustazafan and the college educated. I actually think they have more in common than they have differences towards the regime. So the clergy knows it's in trouble. Seminaries are in dire shortage of men to volunteer to become mullahs. You would think that it would not be the case, that the clergy still remains the route to money and power. I don't think if you made a Soviet parallel, you would see a decline in the number of young men who wanted to go into the KGB. At the end of the Soviet period, I suspect it remains steady. Yet you have a huge drop-off in the number of people who are willing to go into the seminaries. Shiites had never been as good as Sunnis when it comes to mosque attendance. And there are very good and understandable historical reasons for that. But still, it is striking that in Iran, according to the Revolutionary Guard Corps, you have 57,000 Shiite mosques, and fewer than 3,000 are open. And of those 3,000, most of them, or at least half of those, are only open during the holy months. That is reflective, I think, of a real truth about the Islam.
It's a striking statistic. I never heard it.
It's huge. That is one of the things that the Islamic Republic has known, and senior clerics have talked about it, and that is this religious dictatorship breeds secularization. If Islam is about everything, then Islam is about nothing. And this has been a theme that in the more open and honest periods of the Islamic Republic, say in the 1990s, the clergy and theologians spoke about it at some length. Now, the regime does have, in the person of Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, I think he is the most talented Middle Eastern dictator of modern times. His only competition would be Hafiz al-Assad in Syria. He's done remarkably well, considering that he is a poorly educated cleric with zero charisma, and yet he has effectively ruled over and handled the most charisma-rich and cleric-heavy country in the Middle East. So I think one has to give credit where credit is due. It's striking. Somebody in the government recently released a video of when he was chosen as the supreme leader, and to his credit, he honestly says, I have no qualifications whatsoever. So I think Khamenei was well aware, but that is why the late, great, Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani chose him, was because he had no qualifications whatsoever. Actually, he did have some qualifications.
What,
He'd already proven his willingness
what
to
are his
kill people.
What are his talents? Because you said he is the most talented. And
He's a good student. I mean, he's made a hobby out of studying the collapse of the Soviet Union. I think he understands weaknesses, and he knows how to try to avoid them. He knows how to kill them off as quickly as possible. He doesn't like making concessions. He will make concessions, but he doesn't like doing that. I mean, he's a complex, contradictory character. I think Barack Obama, that was one of the few things where I think he got right in his assessment of Iran, where he referred to the supreme leader as complicated. So it's a very difficult, I think, terminal situation for the regime. So far, they've been able to attract a sufficient number of young men who are willing to kill other Iranians. And that is absolutely critical. They have to have the muscle. Without the muscle, the whole system comes apart. Now, whether they're able to maintain that muscle, if they actually have demonstrations that don't go away, and they have to hit people over and over again, we don't know. In 2009, 2010, the regime did things to children of the elite. And remember, the Green Movement was led by members of the elite, particularly the children of the elite. They did things to those children that they'd never done before, including rape. So they had shock waves that went through the entire system. It worked. If you actually look at the death toll in Iran in 2009, 2010, we don't have accurate figures, but it seems like somewhere between 150 and 700 people died, and they collapsed the opposition. By Syrian standards, that's pathetic. All right? So the Iranian middle class, the college educated, didn't prove themselves to be fairly resilient. However, the recent demonstrations would tend to make you believe that no, it's not going away. And now it is actually spread outside of Tehran, and it seems to have spread amongst those that are supposedly the base of the regime. Now, those people may not be as subject to intimidation. We don't know. I mean, this is an ongoing question of whether the regime has the capacity to knock this out. But I think it's important to realize that the numbers here are challenging for the system. And the regime has always feared this spark that is something non-political will galvanize anger and to the system. And before they know it, they've got demonstrations of sufficient magnitude to overwhelm their capacity to repress it. I don't think we're there yet, but we could be. We could be approaching it. But I would just end by saying this. There is no way the regime couldn't possibly, fill up a small little stadium unless they drafted people to go there to listen to someone talk about the virtues of theocracy. Right? It's impossible now. The opposite isn't true. That if they would allow people to gather to talk about the problems of theocracy, they could fill the primary soccer stadium of Tehran and have to put up, televisions to handle the overflow. So the intellectual force is totally on the other side. That's a very bad indicator for the health, long-term, mid-term, or even short-term health for the regime.
Now, I would assume that if you're Dr. al-Labwani and you're listening to this, what you're wondering, not to put words in your mouth, but what you're wondering is, at what point does the legitimacy deficit inside Iran hamper Iran's ability to aid Assad? I mean, it's really quite striking. Two things are really quite striking. One, that this crisis inside Iran comes at the time of maximum success for the regime outside of Iran. I mean, they've had They've had under Barack Obama, they had a good run around Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and so on. And the other thing is, it's so striking to me to hear those protesters on the street saying no to Gaza, no to Syria, no to the IRGC, and so on. Is at this point, Ruel, is Khamenei saying, well, maybe we should pull back? Is that even crossing his mind, or is he?
I mean, well, I mean, we don't know yet. I suspect he'll go the other direction. He'll double down on
not show any weakness.
Not show any weakness. Not change the argument. I mean, they do have an existential problem, and that's as the revolution has shifted from the college-educated to the non-college educated. The revolution has had to seek out a new basis for foreign policy. It doesn't really, the Islamic Republic initially favored Sunnis, you might say. It was very ecumenical in its approach overseas. It wanted to think of itself as a vanguard for all Muslims and their revolution against Western imperialism. The Sunnis, they never ever forgot about the Sunnis in their propaganda. There has been a noticeable, significant continental shift in the way the Islamic Republic sells their foreign policy abroad. It's very difficult to sell a policy, an ecumenical foreign policy, where you have Sunnis killing Shiites throughout the entire region. Now, even though the regime itself is responsible for part of that superheated sectarianism, it still isn't exactly a winning pitch, which is in part, great part, why you've seen the regime shift to explicit Shiite chauvinism and its justification for its policies abroad. And it was also an assumption that it's harder for dissidents in the opposition to attack the regime if they're, after all, they're defending Shiites overseas. There was an assumption that the bond between Shiism and Iranian nationalism was sufficiently tight in Iran that it protected the regime from criticism that they're just engaged in sort of wanton imperialism. These demonstrations and these chants, which are widespread throughout the country, suggest that that argument that they've put forth is failing. So they do have a real existential problem on their hands, that they can't make the Shiite argument, this Shiite chauvinism, Shiite fraternity, as a reason for why they're in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, and the way that they have been.
So, Dr. Labwani, I wanted to bring it back to this question of Israel, and your idea about creating a safe zone in the south. It requires, at the very least, Israeli acquiescence, but you really, I think it probably needs Israeli support. And you told us you've been to Israel 4 times. I thought it was 2. It's 4 times. And you talked to the defense minister and so on. So in a sense, you're suggesting an alliance between Syrian nationalism, Syrian populism, and Israel. And that's revolutionary. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what's the reception among Syrians when you talk to them? Are they supportive of your idea? Do they shun you? It's quite remarkable. Anything you wanted to talk about that?
Yeah. First, I have to speak little about Iran. Now, Iran in competition with time. As much as it paid now by expanding its influence, as much it gained after. So it is now Iran paying, but after 1 year, Iran will take resources, very big resources, and use it to convince their people. So the time is critical now. We cannot defend Iran without a coalition between who loses, Arab, Israeli, and the West. So without this coalition, how we can help the people who say no in Syria, no in Hamas, how we can help them to face the program of Iran. Program of Iran is series from the Gulf to Red Sea to Middle East to Mediterranean Sea. So the corridor between Iran and Beirut, this is important. Which weak ring is Syria. So if we make a corridor from Atanif, East Jordan,
Right.
to Deir Zor,
On the Syrian Jordanian border.
Jordan Jordanian border, and through via the Iraqi Syrian border till we reach Deir Zor. Deir Zor now is part from democratic Syrian and part to ISIS and Iran and so. If we make this corridor, we cut Iran, we cut Iraq from Syria. We will siege the Iranian influence in Syria,
Right.
and by south and east, and the north with Turkey.
So
we can
the slogan is block the land bridge. Block the land bridge.
Okay, it is very easy and important to involve Arab League or Arab states to be partner, and this encourages the Kurd to return to make balance with Iran and with the coalition with Turkey. So we need to make a coalition between Arab and Kurd under supervisor of United States to make balance now and concentrate on Syria. This program is, if it fail, they will make big problem to Iran inside, and after that, we can help the Iranian people to create their revolution.
I mean, I have to say, I'm a little skeptical for the same reasons that Ruel mentioned, just because I don't see, I'm not opposed to it at all. I love your idea, but I notice when I talk to people in the military, there's not a lot of desire for this these days after all of our experience. The more you can present it as not requiring direct American military activity, the better. But I have to say, in the current situation, if the Iranian people saw Revolutionary Guard members coming under attack in Syria from such a coalition, I would think it would have a great impact inside Iran. I mean, they would start to feel that there was a regional coalition that was supporting them in their aspirations. I mean, that would be my hope, at least. Can you talk though a little bit about this your relationship with Israel?
Okay.
How it came about and how it has been received. And more importantly, I'm curious to know how it's received among your fellow Syrians and other Arabs that you talk to.
Yeah, so it depends on the behavior of Israel. Depend on the behavior of Israel.
What depends on the
everything. So they ask me, what you are represent. I am person, come to Israel. Right? How much you need Syrian people like you and cooperate with you? How much? So I will give you the issues which you gain them. Syria now is blank paper. You can write what you want. Syrian people now need money, need the food, need security. They are in urgent needs. It is a chance to move, to give them. I speak about good neighbors policy. Good neighbors policy by medical care, by food, by guard them. It is change the mind of the people, because nobody think the regime, Syrian Arab army killed me, and the defense army of Israel helped me. So it's time to change the people. Maybe they are not ready, but they are in urgent need. They are able to change. Maybe they are not good now, but we don't push them to be worse. We have to help them to be more. So this initiatives, humanitarian initiative, moral initiatives, it's very important to come from Israel.
Now, the Israelis have a program where they provide medical care to people who come across the border who have been wounded.
Limited.
Limited. Did you have anything to do with that?
Yes. So I now in contact with most of the groups inside the South. Everybody asked me if he wanted to go to Israel. Everybody don't mind to have support from Israel. So the situation,
The people, so
people,
the
the
groups,
fighters,
the groups that you're in contact, these are opposition groups in the South,
able now,
and they're reaching out to you and saying, we want to come to Israel, and we want to.
we want to if I became wounded,
Yeah.
I have to treat in Israel. So
And this has become completely legitimate.
yeah. So now I give Israeli contact with most of the leaders there, and they contact, and they know, not me, they know by themselves there is ability now to make a safe zone inside Syria with cooperation. Not the same like of the south of Lebanon. No, it's different because the local people will create their authority and will be.
So this would be village by village, the
Okay.
local elders in the village.
The local people, Druze or Sunni or Dara or anybody. Now it is suitable time to send this message that stability with Israel is make stability with Syria, make peace with inside Syria, because we suffer not from the war between Syria and Israel. The war now and the peace is not exist between Syrians. So it is not the problem now with Israel. The problem by each other. So if they help us to jump this, because this situation continue because nobody want to intervene. Nobody want. Russia intervene and Iranian intervene and the people defeated. Nobody helps them. If they have help, who help them now? He will be friend for a long time. Jewish people don't forget who helped them when the Holocaust. Don't forget that. And Syrian people will never forget who helped them now. Now, because now they are in urgent needs, and it is shame on the humanity to let the people die in this way. So it is time to see the good face of Jewish people, of Israel. It's time to initiate it. That's why I speak about it depend on Israel behavior. If Israel behavior, kill yourself. I don't mind. What's the alternative? What's the alternative? If we say we don't need to help anybody, the alternative is Iran and the gangs, Iran which make a coalition with terrorists, with Qaeda, is make a coalition with fanatic groups. And so Iran which prepare a mass destruction weapons. The program, nuclear program is mutual between Syria and Iran, Kobar reactor.
Yeah.
And now there is another one in Al-Qusayr. And I sent this
That I didn't
report,
know. Yeah.
this report to the government here and the government in Israel, and now investigate. There is nuclear activity still inside Syria, military nuclear activity, part of the Iranian. So Iran will become major power, will make a coalition with the Sunni, and Jordanian maybe collapse, and Israeli will find itself sieged by Iranian coalition with Sunni, and it is very dangerous, and they don't understand if you don't help me, you have to fight all this people. I will stay in Sweden, and you will send your soldiers. Now you have friend on land.
I don't think we mentioned that Dr. al-Labwani lives in Sweden.
Yeah. So the problem now, I just need somebody to think out the enmity of 1960 everything changed. Now Syrian people now killed by Syrian, not by Israel. Israeli help him. So it is very important. I speak to the defense minister. Your medical soldiers is more power than the aeroplane, because this message, small message to the people, change the mind, change the culture, who treat them inside Israel will never shoot you any time, because you help give him the life. So it is time to have the heart of the people by humanitarian issue. It is very important. Humanitarian initiatives. And I really thanks Amalia and Mr. Muti because he understands this and try and pay his money for this. Thank you. So,
Okay, well, thank you. I think with that, let's open it up to some questions in the audience. Yes, sir, over here. Wait, Ahad, I didn't recognize you.
How are you?
You know Ahad. Yeah.
So I'm a Syrian American, and I have a question for Dr. Kamal. We spoke a lot about the possible connection between the U.S.-backed rebels, which are the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurds, and Syrian rebels in the south and other part of Syria. Now we did not talk about the Turkish role. Now Turkey their border with Syria, either with the SDF or with Al-Qaeda in Idlib. All the Turkish troops are not focusing on fighting Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra Front. They're threatening to wage a war against U.S.-backed rebels, the Kurds, which I would say it's the most successful project or example in the Middle East for the United States. You have people in that part of Syria welcoming American troops, giving them flowers, and there are real coordination between military leader in that part of Syria and the U.S. officer or the Pentagon. So how can we do all of that and the president of Turkey that is playing a very bad role in putting more conflict in Syria?
yes.
Thank you.
Because of that, we have not to let the Kurdish area alone. We have to be partner to them and to help them. If Turkey want to fight everybody, okay. So if we work together with them and expand this example to the south, Turkey will be displayed, cannot do anything because the Syrian people will support this. They have to fight the Syrian people, the Arab coalitions, and United States, and they despaired. So we can infect Turkish itself by federal idea. If we bring a good example of federation in Syria, we will infect them by this idea, because this idea is suitable also to Turkey, suitable to Lebanon, suitable to Syria, because the area is very, very mixed nations and mixed religions and mixed. We cannot create there typical nation states depend on race or depend on nationality. No. We need multinational, multicultural, multi-religious states. It needs federal ideas. So I think we can defeat them, or we can prevent Turkey to do anything if we make this example to go to South Syria, and we have good allies from Arab people, and Turkey will be surrendered because the problem will maybe move to inside Turkey. So that's why I think if we let them alone, maybe Turkey continue. But if we help them, not only by the army of United States, by the people of Syria. So that is very important. And they have experience now. They can help us in South. And if United States accept, we will bring the leaders there to teach the South how, to teach the people in the south how they built their hostility. So I think we can do. If we have next step, we cannot withdraw. If we haven't anything, any push, we will withdraw. So
let me ask Ruel if he has anything to comment on the anything in general with regard to Turkey. I know you've spent a lot of time there.
And it's hard to go wrong in Turkish politics if you promise to thump the Kurds. I mean, it tends to unite people. I don't know. I mean, Turkey's is in a bit of a pickle now. They're in a rough situation because the Russians and the Iranians can outplay them with the Kurds, and now they have the Americans who are, of course, giving weaponry to the Kurds. And let us be frank, the Syrian Kurds and the distance between them and the PKK isn't a lot. So it's a hard situation. I'm somewhat skeptical about federal situations arising well after a lot of bloodshed. It's possible, I suppose, in theory. If you look at European history, I think you go the other way. That the way you get peace is through lots of bloodshed and population transfer. So I'm count me skeptical about a successful Arab-Kurdish alliance in either Syria or Iraq, though I think it's more likely in Syria than it is in Iraq.
What about President Erdogan's view of what's going on in Iran right now? How do you imagine he's assessing this from the point of view of his interests?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a situation where the Erdogan looks upon the Iranians as his allies. That would be a first in Turkish-Iranian history. I mean, the two dominant forces in the Middle East since the 10th century have been the Turks and the Iranians. The Arabs are out of it, all right? So I don't see that competition diminishing. I think early on with Erdogan, there was this notion that the more Islamic they became, the more fraternal they could become with the Iranians. And part of that, no doubt, is true. And you could see that, for example, in the recent Zarab case in New York City, where they certainly conspired together to evade U.S. sanctions and reap tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions.
I'm willing to guess that a lot of people in the audience don't know about the Zarab case.
Oh, it's just it was a means, a method for the Turks and the Iranians to use the gold trade to essentially walk around U.S. sanctions on the movement of hard currency. And it was highly effective, and people made vast quantities of money. And by the way, the Obama administration was quite reluctant to actually follow up on it. But with that said, I suspect the historical differences between the Turks and the Iranians, their different conceptions of their roles in Islamic history, the Sunni Shiite angle, it's not going to go away. This was true, before the arrival of secularism. It remains true today. I always remember fondly that, and it was a different era when I was living in Turkey, and it was the Kemalists in power, of course, but the Iranians had one plane that they would circulate all the time to Istanbul. It was the Istanbul-Tehran run, and the plane was named Kurdistan. And the Turks had this cloth diaper that they would put up on the front of the plane to hide it. So every time it would roll in, the diaper would come up and cover the cone of the plane. I think that is an honest assessment of the real Turkish-Iranian tension. And I think it's true regardless of how secular or how Islamic you are. It's there. So I don't see them being warm and cuddly. But whether they wish to work together against the United States now and then, that I can certainly see.
Yes, sir.
Steve Winters, independent consultant. Oh, I'd like to direct this to Ruel. This is a follow-up on the comment you just made. Right, if we go back into Iranian history, back to 10th century, as you said, or even if you want to go back to Persian history, but you have essentially a great power there, and now it seems to be regaining its great power status as along with other former great powers. So when you talk about the potential crack-up of the theocracy, and the effect that may have of Iran, drawing within or pulling back, it may have absolutely no effect on that at all if you interpret what's going on as this rediscovery of one's, historic role in the world. So even if you took the moderates and you changed the theocracy quite a bit, they could still have the exact same expansive tendencies and desires and economic potential. So really, your only hope for having them pulled back is a Libyan situation. In other words, not just a crack up of theocracy, but a crack up of the country.
I don't see that. I don't see anything in the Iranian literature on any quarter that would make me believe that Iranian nationalism is in an expansionist imperialist age. There is no ideological component to that. And as the demonstrators themselves have revealed, they really don't want to have their money sent abroad. I think that element of modern Western culture, which has seeped and permeated into Iran quite profoundly, militates against what you might call the Achaemenid, the ancient glories of Iran. I actually don't see that. I think it's true that the Islamic regime has attempted to naturally marry and intertwine elements of Persian pride, which are profound, with its own Islamist civilizing mission. I would call it a mission civilisatrice, but whenever I use French phrases, he gets very mad at me, so I'm not going to use the French.
It's an insult to
Yeah, it is. He's very patriotic. He's more patriotic than I am. I just don't see it. So I think the nationalist component of Iran now is actually blending in quite profoundly with an aspiration that has been underway for over 100 years, and that is democracy.
Can you wait for the microphone?
Hi, again, Moti Kana. Thank you, Kamal, for the shout out. Working with Kamal on the safe zone in Israeli-Syrian border in the last 3 years. Question to you, Ruel. You mentioned more, and especially being an Israeli American and a Jew, it was very popular in the last 2,000 years to kind of anti the Jews or the Israelis in the last 70 years. Is the Iranian more shaken within Iran and the Israeli publicly supporting that? Do you see, and you mentioned there's more, they will double down the Republican Guard, is again working with Kamal on the safe zone. Do you see the Iranian approaching the Israeli border on the Golan Heights? As I saw 2 weeks ago, Bejan collapse and some Sunni group start looking into towards partnering with the Iranian, similar to the Hamas in Gaza. Would you see the Iranian on the Israeli border in Quneitra anytime soon? There's more pressure on the Iranian within Iran.
Yeah, my guess is no, because they have other issues in Syria at stake. However, the supreme leader and many senior members of the Guard Corps have Jews on the brain. I mean, it's just constant. And actually, one of the healthier observations you can make now is that because the regime has had Jews on the brain for so long, that the opposition to theocracy is moving the Iranians, it seems, in the other direction, that they really don't care all that much about the Israelis and Jews in general, which is great. I mean, that's a healthy evolution. I think the regime's anti-Israeli mission is part of their identity. So I think they are serious in their intent to be a frontline state, particularly if they can make Shiite Arabs bleed in that cause.
They'll fight Israel to the last last.
Yes. I think they're quite prepared to go down there. There are limitations on that. The Iranian regime is rational. They're not stupid in the sense that they do recognize Israeli firepower. So there is a balancing act here, but they're constantly, I think, will test to see what they can get away with. And I think on an emotional level, which is very, very important, when Israelis bleed, when Israelis die, it makes them feel good.
What about, you mentioned that the opposition in Iran is now saying, no to Gaza and we don't need to fight Israel. If you had to guess, we're talking about the public opinion, generally speaking, in Iran. Does the average Iranian, if there is such a thing, think that Israel is its enemy?
I mean,
You've got the opposition, you've got the regime, and then you have everybody else in the middle. The people in the middle, when they hear these things, what are they thinking?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, it's very difficult to assess from a distance how anti-Semitism has permeated into society and has changed the way people view Jews and Israelis. I mean, anti-Semitism has become a common denominator of the entire Muslim Middle East, but how effective it is, how fierce it is, how brutal it is difficult to gauge. My gut feeling in Iran is that most Iranians really don't care much about Israel, in that it just isn't an issue that has any centripetal importance for them. And because the regime they dislike, if not loathe, uses it all the time to justify their actions, it uses it as an integral part of their conception of who they are in the Middle East, then that means that I think the average Iranian goes in the other direction.
They can't get it. They need it in part because of Hezbollah, because the conflict with the Jews is the ladder that Hezbollah climbs to become an Arab nationalist rather than just a Shiite. Yeah. Yeah. In order not to tell people what it really is, which is a Revolutionary Guard light infantry division in Lebanon, there to protect Iranian interests, it has to present itself as anti-Israel. With regard to Iran's alliance with Hezbollah, they're kind of locked into the anti-Zionist.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, if I had to bet, if the Islamic Republic were to go down, you would see a very loud, opening of the American embassy in Tehran, and then you'd have lots of, questions and indigestion, and probably a quiet opening of the Israeli embassy.
Interesting. Dr. al-Labwani, do you have anything you want to add to this?
I think Iran now, the people of Iran, like the people of Syria, because who make pressure, who stole their money is the government, not Israeli. So they make Israeli to cover. They also against the Zionists, but attacking Halab. Against Israeli, but seeking for Mecca. So they announce al-Qudus and go to Baghdad and Mecca. So that is big lie. This big lie now start to broken. Syrian people and Iranian people is same because they are against their governments. Their governments is axis of resistance, and all this ideology start to fall in because the criminals which committed in Syria, it is very, very touch the people heart. So that is makes the Iranian people sense our suffering from their soldiers and start to think in the same way we start to think. As I go to Israeli and jump all this enmity, they are able to do that if they have a chance to do.
You never, when you went to Israel, you never feared for your life with respect to other Arabs and Muslims, that they would identify you as a traitor and...
Just the nationalist who is still alive and they speak without working, and the fanatics which also cannot do anything. I have lot of support from the people, the simple people, lot of support. This is the way to find solution. So I don't feel any risk in Jordan or also in Syria.
Walking along the streets,
and
your people recognize you on the streets.
Yeah, my sister stay in Jordan, and Jordan, Palestine, Amman, Palestine, and her children go to the university. Almost the majority of the students is Palestine. Go negotiation about Israel. I think I can break the ice. So and the people is accept because they suffer a lot from this conflict, and this conflict give nothing till now. Nothing to Palestinian, nothing to Jordanian, nothing to Syrian, nothing. And every time we have to use violent or make war with it, we will lose more. So that's the thing. No, we need to cooperate with Israel to create a new future, new minds. The minds depend on war and depend on between religions and between Jewish or Christianity and Islam. It is ideas of war give nothing. So a new modern style of living is very, very strong. Very strong inside Iran and inside, and change the minds. All the new generation take their culture not from their family, from the internet. So you know that now we are there is revolution in Middle East because internet, not because the situation same since 40 years. But why we now have this spring of internet, Facebook and social media and Wikipedia, and so that is. I think there is a new chance to change all the mentality, historical mentality. Now Turkey with Iran jump all the history of conflict between Safawi and Osmani and try to make a deal with them. So don't depend totally on the old mind. Old mind is died.
Okay. Look who's here, Scott Lisinski. No, we have two. Scott, your question is the last one. Make it good. Make it count.
My seatmate asked the question. Let's do two.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Paul Johnson, and you might say I'm a Persianist for the last 50 years. I specialize in Persian language and literature. And the last time I was in Iran, or when I was in Iran in the 70s, I would go to Mashhad, and I would go to the border of Afghanistan and Iran, and I would be greeted by a contingent of very nice U.S. Army RA troops. Remember U.S. RA? You're that old? And they would be guarding the border because we had and we still have a drug problem with hashish in Afghanistan. Now, when I go there, I'm greeted by very nice U.S. Marines on the Afghani side and very nice regular Army Iranian troops stopping the trade of hashish from Afghanistan to Iran. And some of the hashish we have found, I've been told, has the, you might say, DNA of Afghani hashish. When we go south to a very nice town called...
Sorry, we're at 4:30, so if you could just ask a question, I'd appreciate it, because we're really at the closing hour.
All right, fine. But we have American troops in Iran right now, in Zahedan. We have C-35s at the airport in Zahedan. I don't think too many people talk about this. This is what is going on with Iran right now. You can go to the...
I'm looking for a question.
Fine. Would you please talk about this? If you can.
Thank you.
We're going to have a post-conversation question. Yeah.
We're at the closing here. I'm sorry, you gave up
question.
your question, Scott. Okay, quick.
Quick one, yeah.
Laser-like. Let it be laser-like.
Laser-like. Scott Lisinski, thanks. And I met with Kamal in Israel. It's good to see you back. Why does the Trump administration, given all that we know, which is a lot about Iranian involvement in Syria, why don't we reveal a lot? And Kamal, did it come up in Israel? Why don't the Israelis reveal what we know about Iran? Given everything Ruel said about the chants on the streets in Iran, if we, in this age of information warfare, reveal the extent, the flights, the people on the ground, the finances, we know a lot. And for obvious reasons, we don't reveal a lot, but in this age of information warfare and with Iranians upset about investments elsewhere, would it help if we lifted the veil and raised the curtain on what we know about what Iran does in Syria?
Okay, we got to be very, very brief. Would it help in Syria if the United States released more information? Used its intelligence to shame the regime. The people know it's shame the regime and show what the Iranians are doing and so on. Would that help?
Yeah, of course. Of course, if they just help us to go to media, we have a lot of files, humanitarian files, to make everybody believe that this regime is cooperate with Al-Qaeda, cooperate with ISIS, and commit crimes, criminal crimes, and commit. We have a lot of things we can convince any court, any international society, anybody that this regime is not good, is not. But everybody now don't listen, don't need to work. Israeli also, I ask them personally, please go to media and say there is a criminal man in Syria. But justice, that will make everybody like Netanyahu in Syria. So I think why they don't speak, why they don't do more? Why? Because the politician thinking not about the nation benefits, about their benefits. There is a big problem with all the politicians in all the world. This is my impression. There is big problem with the politician everywhere, in Israel and outside. There is big. They are not honest to their benefits, to the state's benefits. There is big problem. I think democracy must improve, must make something. The democracy now is suffering. It became old. It needs something new to have to make this authority more honest and more clear and more active and think for a long time, not think for new elections. I think this kind of democracy now became old and it has to improve. And so the problem inside the system of Israel, inside the system of not also in Arab states now, in Israel, there is a problem. And in the United States, there is a problem. I don't know exactly what, but I think the democracy itself now is not very good. It is start to be not suitable to the development of living, or I don't know. So,
Ruel,
I don't think it'd make any difference at all.
really?
None.
I was not expecting that answer.
No, I don't think. I think the real issue is the United States is tired of the Middle East, and that isn't a. You can throw all the information that you want, and I don't think it fundamentally changes that sentiment. And certainly, shame doesn't matter. I mean, you can't shame a hooker. So I just don't. I don't see that fundamentally changing until something happens on the ground that wakes the United States up and says, "Uh-oh, I need to come back in here, and I need to come back in with some force." I don't see this equation changing.
All right. Well, with that, let's bring it to an end. And please join me in thanking Reuel Gerecht and Dr. Labwani for what was a very, very interesting and enlightening conversation.
Thank you.